Hello, my name is Jay Henthorn, Richfield Public Safety Director and Chief of Police. I'd like to welcome you to this predatory offender notification meeting where we'll be discussing a level 3 offender that is residing in our community. We believe at the Richfield Police Department that an informed community is a safe community. It is our hope that this information provided in the presentation will be educational and will answer any questions that you may have. If you have additional questions following this presentation, you may contact Jill Mecklenburg of the Richfield Police Department Crime Prevention Unit or Brad Vandervet, Community Notification Coordinator for the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Their contact information will be provided at the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Well, hello and thank you for taking your time to review this important information. I am Brad Vandervet with the Minnesota Department of Corrections in the Risk Assessment and Community Notification Unit. And I'm here today to provide you not only information about the man you're here to learn about, but to also provide some broader context as to how the state's risk management system applies to not only him, but all of those subject to this level of notification. And then I will go on into some additional resources to assist you as you apply this into your own family and broader community safety planning efforts. Where I like to begin conversations like this is with information that we all have already as communities, and that is that those who engage in this type of harm, sexual harm, they exist. And we know and understand that they exist in all communities throughout the state and beyond, whether they live there permanently or pass through for any number of reasons. They are coming around and exist in our areas. And so having that broader awareness, as you'll see, is just so very critical. And so really one of the first questions that comes up from community members in notifications like this is, what are we doing as various agencies throughout the state to address those who we've come aware of in this risk management system through the criminal justice pipeline? And how are we addressing their unique issues and risk factors? And one of those key components, one of those pillars of that risk management system that I want to talk with first is the registry. The registry is maintained by the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and came online in the early 90s and is really born out of the advocacy efforts of the Jacob Wetterling family following his abduction, where they went around to local law enforcement throughout the state and really asked the hard questions of what more can we do to assist you in your efforts in policing this unique population. And law enforcement really resoundingly said, what we need is a system, a database to collate all of our information. Because prior to the registry, this information would be warehoused within each individual agency and accessed only after the fact. And so the registry was born out of that initiative and makes it available, all of this data and information collected and retained on those subject to the registry, readily available for law enforcement at those critical moments when it was most advantageous for them. Now, as you can see here, the registry collects and maintains a great amount of detail and information, primary addresses, including secondary addresses of where the registrant may frequent. So think of places like vacation properties, potentially rentals, or significant others' homes that they may be going to with some regularity. They also must maintain with the registry their locations of employment and if they're operating a motor vehicle for that employer. Other information would include any areas or locations that they attend school and any vehicles that they themselves either use, own, or possess. And so you can see the robustness of the registry. Additional information that they must provide are things such as scars, marks, or tattoos. They must update their photographs, phone numbers, and things of that nature. So the next question that usually comes along as I describe the registry is really, many of you may recall the name change in around 2005 timeframe. And it went from the sex offender registry to the predatory offender registry. And ultimately, this is a result of the legislature seeing the benefit of this tool for law enforcement and policing purposes and growing it to include not only those individuals either charged with or convicted of sex crimes, but also those who may be charged with or convicted of other non-sex specific crimes such as false imprisonment and kidnapping. And so the name of the registry had to change to now the Predatory Offender Registry. And a simple way to keep it straight in your mind as we go forward today is this, is that all sex offenders are predatory offenders, while not every predatory offender is a sex offender. Now, as I described, the registry is maintained by the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and by law is set as a tool for law enforcement purposes only, meaning that the data and information collected on it is for law enforcement use and cannot be shared publicly. However, for meetings like this, I'm able to take a 30,000-foot flyover peak at the information to share it with you so you can have a better understanding of just what it is we're talking about. So as you look at this information, I want you to have in your mind an analogy of a funnel. And at its widest end are those crimes that we know are occurring. And as those crimes occur, only a portion go on to be reported to law enforcement, and that funnel begins to narrow. Of those reported, only a portion of that group will go on to receive formal charges, and we narrow yet again. Of those formally charged, only a portion of that group will go on to receive sentences or convictions for that crime or crimes, and we narrow yet again. And at an even narrower point in that funnel are those individuals who go to prison as a result of that conviction. And I'll go into a little more detail here in a moment as to why that's a unique distinction. But as you can see, by the time we get to these numbers here in front of you today, we are already well down that funnel, about 2/3 of the way, if not better, to the point where on the registry at the first of this year, we had approximately 18,790 individuals on it. That's all of them. Those of no level assigned, up to and through those designated as a risk level of 3. And as we look more closely at a snapshot in time when I most recently ran these numbers, you can see on the left-hand side are those registered individuals out of that 18,790 who reside, at least we're reporting primary residence within various areas throughout your community and around. And you can see that smaller number to the right are those designated level 3 or who are subject to broad public notification. And you can see the discrepancy between the much larger number to the left and that smaller number to the right. That smaller number to the right, those are the people we get to share broader information about, but not to the point where we don't want you thinking about all of the others. Now, law enforcement gets to know all of them. However, we get that much smaller percentage, but we're able to take a lot of the detail that we get to learn about that group, and we can apply that information much more broadly as we implement it into our safety planning efforts. Another component of that broader state risk management system that I want to talk with you about today is the Notification Act. Now, community notification is separate from the registry and came online, as you can see, much later in 1997, and is really founded on the research and data that supports that a well-informed community is in fact a safer community. And we in the Department of Corrections commend and thank the Richfield Police Department in all of its efforts to ensure that this important information gets out to the broadest amount of people possible today. So because the Notification Act is the reason we're here and able to talk with you right now, it's worth going into some additional detail as to how it functions. Now, you heard me earlier say that those registered individuals aren't all bearing a risk level. There are those who are no level assigned. This should not be taken to imply that they have no risk. It simply indicates that they have not been measured for risk. In order for somebody to be looked at and reviewed for their risk, they must cross the threshold of a state prison. Now, that's any state in the union to include U.S. territories and also federal prisons and military prisons abroad. But they must cross one of those thresholds to trigger that risk level assessment and assignment. And so that leaves that group, that non-defined group of no level assigned, are juveniles on the registry and those adults on the registry who have received stayed or probationary sentences as a result of their time through the court system. And so that group goes into the no level assigned category. So when it comes to those that do cross the threshold, the next question is, who then does what? Who is responsible for these various roles? And the legislature set it up so that the Department of Corrections is the agency responsible for the assessment of and assignment of that risk level, And the way that that is conducted is through the End of Confinement Review Committee, or the ECRC. Now, that committee convenes 90 days prior to that individual's release into the community or earlier to review their risk through the risk assessment tool known as the MinSOST. And the MinSOST is completed by one of our staff psychiatrists who sits down and does a full forensic review of all of their available information, up to and including a direct interview with that individual. And that then is all put into that risk assessment tool that makes a presumptive determination of a level of either 1, 2, or 3. Now, to just get your mind around a little bit how that tool works, understand that there was a robust research study conducted right here by the State Department of Corrections that began in the early 90s when these laws were beginning to take effect, and the initial phase of it concluded in the early 2000s, so over a decade's time, where over 3,166 known adult male sex offenders were tracked and monitored at their release from prison into Minnesota communities. And the assessors monitored and tracked their successes and their failures, and ultimately used that information and data to create their known predictive risk factors, vetted through the scientific review process, have now become normed data sets. So when I speak to you today about a level 1 individual, what I'm saying is that this individual shows a lower amount of those known predictive risk factors as compared to that peer group. A level 2 has a moderate amount, and a level 3 has a higher amount. A couple things to keep in mind about risk assessment tools is that while they are very good at aiding and assisting law enforcement and corrections in working to mitigate those known predictive factors as effectively as possible, the one thing they cannot do is predict the future. Another thing about risk that I want you to have in your mind as we go forward is that it is dynamic. Risk is continually fluctuating and changing, meaning that a level 1 designee today, if they are not abiding by all of the expectations placed upon them, may find that that level goes up. Just as a level 3 today may find that if they are showing through a lengthy period of compliance that they are adhering to those expectations and mitigating their risk, that that level may go down. So keep that in mind. So once a risk level is assessed and assigned, the handoff then goes to our partners in law enforcement. And law enforcement will provide notification within the scope of that level designation. So for a level 1 individual, law enforcement will provide notification to other law enforcement agencies. They will provide notification to any victims of the offense or witnesses to the offense if they have requested that level of enhanced notification. And they will also provide notification to those adult household members residing in that immediate residence with that designee. And that is the scope of a level 1 notification. A level 2 notification builds upon those individuals and entities we just discussed with a level 1 and adds to that group other individuals or entities that law enforcement determines to be at particular risk based on their knowledge and understanding of that level 2 person's known pattern of conduct and behavior. Now, it is often believed that with a level 2 designee, law enforcement will provide notification to places where children congregate, like schools or daycares or things of that nature. And while that very well may be true, it is not always the case. So in an example where law enforcement is made aware of a level 2 designee coming into their jurisdiction, and they review that dossier of information provided by the risk assessment notification unit and determine that this individual focuses their conduct and behavior on adult females at social gatherings, think concert venues or bars or things of that nature. In that scenario, law enforcement may find it's more prudent to notify the proprietors of those areas where adult females may congregate, as opposed to those proprietors of daycares where children from birth to school age may be present. And so that's the nuance of a level 2 notification. Now, on the flip side, if you have a level 2 come into the community and law enforcement determines that this individual focuses their conduct and behavior on unaccompanied minors, think teens in transition from school to after-school programs or home. And law enforcement knows within their community that this group has a hangout spot, a hot spot, if you will, where the teens like to congregate in that downtime and socialize. In that scenario, law enforcement very well may go to the proprietor of that hangout spot and let them know, hey, if you see this individual in and around the area formulating relationships with the kids, we want to know. Give us a call, and we'll have an officer come out and speak with them and find out more about what they may be up to. And so there you can kind of see some of the nuance. And then on to a level 3 notification. Now, this is that broad public notification, and it comes in a variety of formats and really comes down to how law enforcement communicates best with its community. And so you see a lot of variation. The one thing you'll see consistently across the board is that those subject to this level notification will be placed onto the Department of Corrections public registrant search tool. So you can go on there today and you can review those that reside within a certain zip code, within a city, or within a county, if you want to see what's going on with someone. And it's a tremendous tool as you're trying to get your head around the broader context of what we're talking about today. I want to share with you some information about the research that was conducted regarding this group of individuals so that you can use that knowledge to apply it into your own community and family safety planning efforts. Now, at the narrowest end of that funnel are those individuals that go to prison and receive that risk level designation. Now, as you can see from this information, that while the number of individuals entering our prison system year after year does fluctuate and change, the breakdown of risk levels assigned tends to stay fairly static to the point where we can say on average, well over, or 2/3 of that group will be assessed and assigned a level of 1 or 2. About 15%, again, on average, are designated that of a level 3. And so that's a much smaller group that we get to talk about. But again, remember that the information we get to share on that particular group can be applied much more broadly. So as to the point where I took the most recent snapshot of that tool that can review all those individuals in the community, you could go on there today and say, show them all to me. And if you'd have done that on March 8th, like I did, you would have seen there were 458 registered individuals subject to that broad public notification. Of that 458, 13 were out of compliance. And again, this is where this tool can be really helpful as you're vetting people coming into your lives who may be volunteers, who may be tutors, or whatever the case may be, or trying to apply for a job or whatever, so that you can utilize this information most effectively in your own family and community safety planning. Other information I want to share with you about some of the research that was done actually comes from the U.S. Department of Justice, but it really aligns with the information that we attained in our own research and data. And that is the breakdowns of relationships between those who engage in this type of harm and the people they hurt. And as you can see here, the majority are those exploiting a relationship, a knowing of the person that they're harming. And they use that relationship to manipulate and coerce those individuals they're targeting into that harmful conduct. That much smaller group, about 7%, as you see here, falls into that stranger category. And no doubt, as you're thinking about all this information, you're thinking, Brad, I have a lot of control and influence and impact over those who I allow into my children's lives, whether it's family or an acquaintance. And I can vet those people appropriately. But that group that gives us the most pause, as it should, is that stranger category. So it's important to understand some of the limitations to this study. So the researchers had to determine a cutoff point for what constitutes a relationship. And that decision was made to be 24 hours. If an assessor cannot determine that a knowing or a relationship existed of 24 hours or greater, that scenario would fall into the stranger category. So inevitably, what you would have in situations like this could be something where two teens meet up at a house party and they didn't know each other prior and they hit it off and the night is going the way it's going and they leave the group to an isolated location within the house or off the property or whatever the case may be. And the night takes an awful turn. Now, this scenario would fall into that stranger category. But what we tend to think of more is loved ones and trusted adults, support people. When we think of stranger, is that person lurking just outside of our awareness, who we don't know exists, who has ill intent to do harm. That group falls into a much smaller percentage of about 3%. Now, that is cold comfort. I am very well aware. But what I do not want is for you to take all of your energy and resources and focus them on that smallest percentage of risk. I want it spread out broadly, particularly focusing on those areas we know to be at much higher levels of risk. Other information I want to share with you before we get into the specifics about the man you're here to learn about is the age breakdowns of those that are harmed by this type of conduct and behavior. And as you can see, the majority of those are children, 2/3 of that group. And if you really start to look at those numbers, you'll see that the narrowest age range up there, those teenage years, are 33% of those harmed. That's 9% of the population and worthy of a little more detail and explanation. And so what we know from agencies' perspectives is that those children from those early years up into those preteen years are still very much under the watchful, caring gaze of their trusted adult support network. But so we want to make sure we give those folks the best tools possible to vet the people coming into those kids' lives. But what we get when we get into those teenage years is the very thing that we as communities strive to achieve. And that is a place where our kids can go out and express themselves and explore their own autonomy independent of that direct adult interference, if you will. And while that's something that they very much deserve, and we want them all to have, it is what renders them potentially vulnerable. Because now they are formulating relationships outside of that watchful gaze. And so we as parents and loved ones, we take our teen aside at those critical ages, and we remove the veil just enough, just to show our kids that the world is not as safe as it had been made to be for them when they were younger. But we found with that model of the talk that our kids would react one of two very polarizing ways. Either they would reject the information and say, Mom, Dad, you're overreacting, or they would become so fearful that they would withdraw from the very things they've grown to love. Neither reaction is what we as various agencies seek to attain. What we've found through our work and collective efforts with collaborating with victim services advocacy groups around the state is that a lot of little talks are far more effective so as not to create fear out of our children, because we know that scared kids do not equal safe kids. But we also need our kids to understand that nice people do not equal safe people. And so I will provide some additional information here for resources as you're looking to augment and grow those conversations you're having with your children and loved ones. Now I'd like to switch gears and talk about the man you're here to learn about today. Use the information I've already provided you as an overlay and see where things may align and see where they may diverge. This is Shannon Irby. First, I want to speak about photographs. Photographs are updated on average of annually, or if the individual significantly changes or modifies their appearance. If you were to see Mr. Irby or anyone from the notification tool that has modified their appearance and no longer looks like their photos, let local law enforcement know, or their agent if they're working with a corrections agent, and we will ensure that updated photos get added to the registry, and then for as long as they're subject to broad notification, I will make sure those photos get pulled and put on to that public registrant search tool. These are Mr. Irby's vitals, and he is preparing to reside at the 7,000 block of Bloomington Avenue South here in Richfield. I want to speak a moment about proximal addresses. Often a question will come up as to, can we know exactly where he resides? And you may recall from my earlier information that that specific detail and data is private and for law enforcement purposes only. However, we can accomplish a lot with a proximal address, because undoubtedly those who live in and around this area, this neighborhood, will become aware of Mr. Irby if they're not already, as they see him come and go in his day-to-day activities. And that will be shared among that community, and that's just fine. But what we do not want as agencies is for that information to spread or proliferate more broadly to the point where somebody from well outside of the Richfield community, who has no stake in what goes on here, comes in to exact some vigilante revenge scenario that does nothing to restore a victim, does nothing to preserve community safety, and only serves to disrupt the very thing you've worked so hard to achieve here. And so that is the nature of that proximal address. This is a synopsis of Mr. Irby's registrable offense history. It's not an exhaustive criminal history. If you're interested in his full criminal history, it is available to you on the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension website under the public history search function. All you need is his first name, last name, and date of birth, which you have, and you can put it in and you can review it. And you can use that tool to vet others as well. Again, as you're looking at folks coming into the lives of your children or family or loved ones, use this tool for that purpose. But I want to get right into the specifics as to what occurred regarding his registrable conduct and behavior. In 1993, Mr. Irby was charged with and ultimately convicted of criminal sexual conduct in the first degree, second degree, fourth degree, and an attempted third degree out of Sherburne County. He was, at the time of this offense, incarcerated in a Department of Corrections prison in St. Cloud. He assaulted a staff person whom he'd been working with in her office. And for that crime, he was given or sentenced to an 82-month commit to prison. Now, often another question that will come up in conversations like this is, how is it that our system is structured to where people who engage in this type of harm that really shocks our conscience and really alarms us, how is it that they come out? And one of those answers, or at least a component of it, is here in determinate sentencing. Prior to determinate sentencing, we had a much more familiar model of parole, where an individual who engaged in whatever crime brought them into prison would go before a panel or a board and effectively request permission to serve the remainder of their prison time in the community under parole supervision. Now, for those who engaged in person crimes, particularly those of this type of nature, found it exceptionally hard to be granted that parole opportunity. Now, hearing that, no doubt you think to yourself, that's okay, Brad. We are very comfortable with those who engage in this kind of harm serving out the entirety of their sentence. They've at the very least earned and deserved that punitive sanction. But what we found from all the data and research we collected was that model failed to impact recidivism in a meaningful way. Because what was happening were these individuals would sit till expiration. And remember, folks, that 90% of those incarcerated individuals or better in Minnesota prisons today will come out. And so what we found is that by bringing them to the gate at the expiration of that sentence and saying, don't come back, did not impact that recidivism. But what we did find was that the determinate sentencing model very much did. And so what it does is it breaks down that sentence into thirds. If they go to prison, 2/3 by law must be served in the prison. 1/3 must be served by law in the community, where they're working with a corrections agent as they transition and taking all the skills and tools they learned while in the facility and transitioning them into their community time, so that by the time they do expire, they've internalized those mitigating components from treatment and therapy and counseling so that they go on to lead quiet lives. So this occurred while he was already in prison for a non-sex related conviction, and he assaults a staff, and he gets an additional 82 months assigned to him. Because of the staff assault, he is then transitioned from the St. Cloud facility to our Max facility in Oak Park Heights. And so he goes from 1992, he enters prison. He was already there, but this is when that new crim sex file comes online. And he gets assessed and assigned in 97 as a risk level 2. So he hits that 90-day mark prior to that 2/3 release. And the end of confinement review committee reviews his conduct and assigns him a risk level 2. Now, in 1995, he engaged in another assault while at the Oak Park facility, not sex related, but in another assault of a staff person in that facility. And so the court reviewed him and determined that additional resources needed to be applied to ensure a healthy transition into the community. So at that expiration date in 1999, he did not enter the community. He went to a Department of Human Services facility where he remained until 2017. Prior to his release from that facility, DHS, much like the Department of Corrections, assesses and assigns risk. And they reviewed him at that time and determined that his risk level would be that of 3 because they contemplated and added in that other assault that I just referenced. And so he then transitions to the community for his first time since all of this in 2020. And he's been in the community since that date, and he will move from his current location to the Richfield location here this month to Richfield. So as it sits for Mr. Irby today, he is not under any correctional supervision. His time with the Department of Corrections has expired. His sentences have run to expiration, and his rights have been restored to him with that regard. He is, however, still working with the Department of Human Services in their capacity. He is also subject to the registry for life. And so law enforcement will always know where he is, where he works, what he drives, and so on. And for as long as he retains that level 3 designation, he will be publicly available for review on that public registrant search tool. Now I want to transition into resources for you as you're looking to gain additional information as you're seeking to apply all of this into your own family and community safety plans. Your best and most direct resource available to you is your Richfield Police Department. These folks are here to support you in all ways. Reach out to them. As you know from my earlier slide that they are managing more than just Mr. Irby. They have a robust group of officers who are very good at the work they do. Lean on them if you have questions. If you see this man or anyone engaging in conduct or behavior that you feel is detrimental to public safety, I want you calling 911 and get that support out there as quickly as possible. If you have more general questions about how the city police department manages this unique population, certainly call their non-emergency number or contact Jill Mecklenburg. She's a fantastic resource for your community as well. As you're thinking about those conversations you'd like to have with your loved ones and children, make sure that you're including the folks at the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. They are a cornerstone of our state's victim services organizations and have a tremendous amount of information available that will assist you as you're having those important age-appropriate conversations. In addition to the JWRC, I want to share with you your local victim services provider. Conversations like this, no matter how hard we try, have a way of unnerving us. And if you find that this information has triggered perhaps a memory of something you once thought forgotten or dealt with, or you know someone who's struggling with this information, please reach out to your local providers. They are there to assist you and get you the help and services you deserve. Now, in closing, I'd like to just kind of wrap things up and thank you for bearing with me as we go through this information. But if you take nothing else away, please let it be this, that from our research and data and from what we know, and we know a lot, is that those who've gone through that full array of that state risk management system, 90% or better, do not go on to reoffend in a same or similar fashion. Of those that engage in this type of harm, they tend to focus that harm on someone that they know, an acquaintance or family or something in that realm. Only 10% or less are those who focus on people that they don't have that 24-hour or better relationship with. And so that ultimately leaves us with, well, Brad, who should we be most aware of? And that is those folks who have no connection with the criminal justice system for their conduct and behavior. 90% of those who are out there engaging in this type of harm year after year, if you look at sentencing data for the state, are those who have no prior convictions as sex offenders. We did not know them to be in that category. And so that broad awareness, as you can see, is just so critical. It really does come down to that relationship component. It is so much more telling than any geographical proximity or location could ever hope to be. And so those relationships are what we want you most focused on. In addition to those resources I've already talked to you about, I want to share with you some other available information and resources. Please don't let this be the only data you receive on this important topic. And then lastly, I know I spoke to you about the BCA and their resources along with the Department of Corrections resources. Please utilize those tools. If you have any trouble finding them or utilizing them, contact me and I will happily get you there to get you the support you need. I want to thank you again for your time, and I want to thank the City of Richfield and the Richfield Police Department for inviting me out to share this important information. Please reach out with your questions. Thank you very much and be well.